Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, so glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We're just one day away from Independence Day. Wishing you a great 4th of July. And don't forget that tomorrow we'll have our 4th of July special here on the Three Martini Lunch. It'll be an encore presentation of what we love about America. There are many things we love about America. We've done multiple specials on that over the years, and we're going to play one of our favorites on Friday. So please join us for that. But today we're going to be looking at stories that have been on our list day after day sometimes over the past few weeks, and we just didn't get to it because there was so much other stuff going on, whether it's the LA riots or whether it's what's going on in the Middle East, and on and on and on. So we've chosen a number of stories here, 3 as usual, as we examine things that came really, really close to being part of the Three Martini Lunch, and only massive headlines got in the way. And so, Jim, let's first of all talk about voter ID. The Democrats keep calling this a massive civil rights issue, and it's just so hard for minorities and other people to get IDs, and it's Jim Crow all over again. We've heard this so many different times. And
Jim Eagle, even bigger bird, as President Biden infamously put it.
Yes, if you support it, you're the same as Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis, I believe, among other people, maybe George Wallace too. But when you actually ask people what they think about this, even in the bluest of areas, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. This story is from 810 KSFO radio out in California, and this is from May 9th. A majority of California voters support showing proof of citizenship to cast a ballot, not just voter ID, proof of citizenship. A new poll from the UC Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies poll, which was co-sponsored by the LA Times, shows 71% of those polled say first-time voters should show proof of citizenship. This includes 59% of Democrats and 95% of Republicans. A proposal that seeks proof of citizenship every time a voter casts a ballot also has majority support, with 54% approving. This includes 88% of Republicans and about 40% of Democrats. So that even goes beyond voter ID. But voter ID should be a drop in the bucket. And so for those who stand in the way of it, you got to scratch your head and ask why. Usually it's Democrats. I remember Eric Holder standing in the way of states, cleaning up their voter rolls, and he was demonizing voter ID. But sometimes Republicans are standing in the way, not too often, but it did just happen last month in Nevada. And this is the AP story. Nevada Republican Governor Joe Lombardo unexpectedly vetoed a bill on Thursday that would have required voters in the swing state to show a photo ID at the polls, a conservative priority across the country and something that has long been on the governor's legislative wish list. The move brings a dramatic end to one of the legislative session's most surprising outcomes, a bipartisan deal that combined the requirement for voter identification with a Democratic-backed measure to add more drop boxes for mail ballots that Lombardo had initially vetoed. And so the bill came back together in the final days of the session, passed mere minutes before the Democratic-controlled legislature adjourned just after midnight, June 3rd. Lombardo had been expected to sign it. But Lombardo says while he wholeheartedly supports voter ID laws, he felt that the bill fell short on addressing his concern about ballots cast by mail. And so, Jim, you and I have talked about securing mail-in ballots. That's a legitimate issue. Wish the legislature could have separated these two things here. But to veto this, that doesn't look good.
Yeah, it feels a bit like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The bill would have required people voting by mail to provide the last 4 digits of their Social Security or driver's license number or their entire voter identification number, which is assigned to people when they register to vote. By the way, also worth noting on the photo ID bill, I've always felt like, yes, you should require photo ID. It should also be easy to get photo ID once you can verify that for the state. I've heard some people say, oh, it's expensive. Usually there's processing fees if you want to get a driver's license. So, all right. So the answer is let's make it, no cost, low cost, or very easy to get a photo ID as long as you can say, yes, I was born in this country. I'm a U.S. citizen. I have the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. And the bill was going to require the Secretary of State to issue voters a free digital ID card at the Department of Motor Vehicles to provide free driver's license to people who demonstrate they're experiencing financial hardship. You lost your job. You're behind on the rent. This should not be interfering with your right to vote. All seemed like good, solid stuff. I guess what Lombardo did not like was the fact that it was going to verify people through their signature, even if the identifying number says could not be immediately verified. Now, in a whole bunch of jurisdictions, if you show up to vote and your ID doesn't match what they have in their records, or you say I'm registered, I just moved here, but I'm registered to vote here, and they say, well, actually, no, they'll give you what they call the provisional ballot, right? The attitude is, okay, we don't know if you're voting in the right place or not. We'll give you a ballot, we'll put it aside, and we're going to string this out. And if you're voting in the correct place, then okay, great, fine, we count the ballot. If you're not voting in the right place, we say, no, you're not, your ballot won't be counted. That always struck me as a very reasonable way of organizing this. If the identifying number cannot be immediately verified, okay, then take that ballot, put it aside, and figure out if you can verify it. If you can verify it, great, you count it. If you can't verify it, or it's the wrong one, well then no, you don't count. This does not seem like the sort of thing that should trip up the entire bill. And I think Lombardo has, it's not a wild, crazy concern, but it also seems like a very small point to get rid of the requirement of photo ID and keeping with the status quo in the state of Nevada. And just finally, your point about the polling numbers out in California. We joked about Biden's response to the, election law changes in Georgia. Turnout was super high. Reaction from voters was very high. I believe 0% of African-American voters after the 2022 midterm said they had a hard time voting. Every Republican legislature in the country should be enacting changes like this. There is no political downside. There's not going to be a backlash. Yeah, you might get brutal coverage of it. And they may try to run the exact same playbook as they did in Georgia in 2022. But honestly, if it didn't work there and the voting numbers are on your side in places like California, what's stopping you, man? What's the holdup here? So again, it just seems like a basic one. It enhances faith in election results. It kind of dispels some of the conspiracy theories. Never mind 80-20. Like if you're a Republican, you're looking for as many 80-20 issues as possible. And this is one of those ones where the majority is absolutely on their side. Guys, come on, let's get to it. There's, midterm elections the next year.
Exactly. Now, of course, Democrats have a lopsided majority in both chambers in the California legislature, so they won't want to do this. In fact, you've got Democrats in some areas, including here in D.C., also in other areas that have been pushing for non-citizens being able to vote in local elections. Thankfully, the courts up in New York and elsewhere have pushed back on that considerably. But the fact that you don't want voter ID and you do want non-citizens voting in local elections, got to ask some questions, things that make you go, as they said back in the 90s, right?
I was going to say, New York City wanted to do this. I believe the state court struck that down, and Congress just told the District of Columbia, no, you cannot have, non-citizens voting in local elections because it would be nice. Citizenship has to have some privileges that non-citizens don't.
Quite the contrast between red and blue states, and we'll have another major contrast between red and blue states in just a moment. But I'll tell you one place that could help you explain the difference between the success of the red states like Florida and deep blue states like New York, Hillsdale College, because freedom is the answer. But Hillsdale is ready to teach you for free on a number of different issues, including topics that seem way too complex in the minds of some, like American foreign policy, and it can be complicated. Is it a mystery to you? It's often treated as an untouchable topic that only can be understood by an enlightened few, but that's not true, and that's why Hillsdale is offering the free online course, American Foreign Policy, so you can learn how America should make decisions with a view towards securing equal natural rights of American citizens, as well as analyzing and understanding the matters of war and peace that affect all of us. This is a 9-lecture series. Again, it's free. It goes all the way from the American founders through the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. It'll take you from the Spanish-American War, World War I, Cold War, global war on terrorism, all the way up to this very moment. Hillsdale is offering more than 40 free online courses. Yes, free online courses, including the U.S. Constitution, the Book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and much more. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/Martini to enroll in this course, American Foreign Policy. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/Martini to enroll for free. All right, Jim, this next one is flagged by your colleague at National Review, Dominic Pino, but he flagged it after seeing it from a guy named David Ditch, who covers the federal fiscal issues with Epic for America. And here is the difference between New York State and Florida since the year 2000. Remember, Florida's the laughingstock on the year 2000, at least in terms of elections. But ever since that time, in fact, starting in January of 1999, Florida has had nonstop Republican governors. New York also had a Republican governor from the beginning of this century till 2007 with George Pataki. Since then, it's been a Star Wars bar scene of characters from Elliot Spitzer to David Patterson to Andrew Cuomo to Kathy Hochul. Not exactly impressive. But this is about government spending and the results that they're getting. So Dominic says these are the comparisons between New York and Florida, similarly sized states with very diverse populations. New York's spending per capita was 30% higher than Florida's in 2000. It was 133% higher last year. New York's Medicaid spending per capita was 112% higher than Florida's in 2000. It was 208% higher last year. Florida has not expanded Medicaid under Obamacare, while New York has expanded it more aggressively than any other state. For perspective, in 2024, New York spent nearly as much per capita on Medicaid, $4,551, as Florida did for its entire state budget per capita, $5,076. Also, education. New York's education spending per student is highest in the country at about $35,000 per student. Florida spends about $13,000 per student. Florida fourth graders rank third in the country in reading and fourth in math. New York fourth graders rank 36th and 46th. Florida has surpassed New York in population and continues to boom. From 2000 to 2024, New York's population grew 4.5%, while Florida's grew 45.6%, a 10-fold difference. So leadership matters, policy matters, and Jim, we hear it every election cycle. We need to spend more on this. Every time we're in a appropriations debate, if you cared, you'd spend more money on it. It's not the amount of dollars. It's the policies where those dollars go towards, and we see it over and over and over again.
We on the right often talk about the failure of the blue state model. And defenders of places like California will always say, well, if California became its own country, it would be the, I don't know, what are they, fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. It's a very big economy. You look at why big blue states, and in particular, a lot of these blue states are dominated by big blue cities, your New York cities, your Los Angeles, San Francisco. Why are they such big economically? Well, a lot of that is kind of built in, right? It's built in for over decades, and in the case of New York, like 2 or 3 centuries of being the center of trade and commerce. So it gives them a nice big advantage over, say, Wyoming or a whole bunch of other countries that don't have a major city, major trading port, things like that. But the thing is, you can eventually lose that, or it starts to dwindle after a while. There are certain features in California that cannot relocate. The port of Los Angeles and the port of Long Beach cannot easily relocate to some other state. You can send the shipments to other places, but you can't, the ports themselves can't go. The Central Valley and all that agricultural land, that can't move to another state. Having said that, film production started moving to Georgia and Vancouver. Silicon Valley, more and more companies started moving out to Austin, Chicago, a whole bunch of cities of corporate headquarters started moving out of the city. So after a while, your quality of life can get so bad in some of these places. The tax rates can get so bad. The regulations can get so bad that after a while, even your biggest employers are like, you know what? We don't need to be here. We're going to find a better place to relocate. And very often, Texas and Florida have been 2 of the biggest beneficiaries of that. Other states as well. But I think if you look at where the biggest influx of people are moving to, it is Texas and Florida, and generally red states in the South. Yes, some of that's nice weather, as the president contended when he was arguing with DeSantis. But I think it also is the fact that people know that's where the jobs are. People know that's where it's booming. People know that's where, generally speaking, cost of living is lower. Now, I know I'm probably going to hear from some Floridians and Texans who are saying, what, are you kidding me? It's gotten more expensive lately. And it has. But it's still cheaper than a whole bunch of places in California. It's still cheaper than a whole bunch of places in New York. My colleague Dominic Pino also looked at the share of the civilian labor force that works for government. I found something kind of interesting. So between these 4 states, Florida and Texas, California and New York, you probably would figure that the state that has the highest proportion of its labor force working for government is New York. Okay, that's, You probably would think the second one would be California. But up until very recently, that's not the case. California ranked 3rd. For a long while, Texas was 2nd, although now it's slipped to 3rd just to around 2023 or so. And Florida was always the lowest. Florida, the line is actually a nice, long, slow, steady decline, meaning more and more proportion of the workforce is working for the private sector. In Texas, it's actually kind of creeped up a bit in the last couple of years. I don't know if this represents, expansions in state government. I know most people think of, it's a heavily Republican state. Look, Republican is not always a synonym for conservative, and Republican is not always a synonym for limited government, small government, and willing to make budget cuts. And if you don't believe me, ask Elon Musk. So when you look at all this, again, is this arguing that the state of Texas is too big? It also is a clear statement about the expansion of the size of the state government out in California. And I think a whole bunch of people in California would argue that they're not getting their money's worth. They're not getting their value for all that they're paying in state taxes and all the government employees that there are out there. Also, unsurprisingly, New York State of these four is the one that is most dependent upon, state employment as a share of its workforce. And I think New Yorkers would also question that. So look, the only time you should be saying, yes, New York is better than Florida is when it comes to the football teams.
Yeah, it's amazing that, unlike the private sector, the left and the public sector always believes that the answer to everything is basically keep doing what you're doing, just add more people and spend more on it. Try that in the private sector when you're struggling. Spend a whole lot more money and hire more people while trying to do the exact same thing. It's not going to work, and it doesn't work in the public sector either, but they just keep doing it because they try to make the argument that it's the compassionate or the serious way to address the problem. No, the serious way to address the problem is to change the policy so it actually works and get government out of the way. And so Florida over the last quarter century is great proof of that, and New York is proof the other way, and that's why the populations are trending the way they are in those places.
Greg, let's also take a moment to notice that as much as I fully support Americans voting with their feet and moving to places where they like the state and local government better, it does tend to leave the blue states even bluer, and everyone who doesn't like the policies moves out. So they have, that may well be what we're seeing in places like New York City and Los Angeles for that matter.
Well, and the most frustrating part is the liberals who end up hating the state that they're living in, not realizing that they're the ones who voted for those policies. And then they go to redder states and try to do the exact same thing, which is what's happening in places like Colorado.
Greg, if a homeowners association can be such a pain about where the mailbox is and the height of your picket fence, can at minimum you moved here from California. Okay, we have a little questionnaire for you. What state policies led to the problems in your state that you just moved from? And which kind of officials did you vote for in the past? And do you regret any of those votes? Have you learned anything? And what, if you had a chance to do it differently, what would you do differently? And just see what the questionnaires are. And then maybe we need a new voter registration program, a new voter education program.
Yes.
What have you learned from hard experience that brought you to our deeper, redder state?
And then that questionnaire will determine whether you're allowed to live in that community, and they'll be gone over like the parole board in the Shawshank Redemption. And if you haven't learned anything from your bad votes, cha-ching, rejected or approved if you actually have learned a lesson. But usually lefty voters, they're slow learners when it comes to this stuff sometimes. So, well, the last thing you want if you're running a business is missed opportunities and missed customers. And if you want to make sure you don't miss those opportunities again, go with Open Phone. In today's fast-moving world, your team needs to stay connected to your customers without missed messages, communication silos, or slow phone systems. A flexible and efficient business phone system isn't just nice to have, it's essential to succeed. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying two phones or using a landline. Plus, with AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, you'll be able to automate follow-ups, ensuring you'll never miss a customer. Plus, with AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, you'll be able to automate follow-ups, ensuring you'll never miss a customer interaction again. See why more than 50,000 businesses trust OpenPhone to manage their business's calls and texts. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ml. That's OPENPHONE.com/3ml. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone. No missed calls, no missed customers.
Is financial independence like dieting or losing weight?
The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet.
Being financially independent is simple, but it's not easy. The #1 rule is you gotta let materialism go to the wayside. Don't let spending money or shopping be your favorite pastime.
Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, on to our third and final martini now. And Tim Walz has been in the news a bunch in the last few weeks. A couple times he was giving speeches about how we needed to bully the bleep out of Donald Trump, and we need to get meaner and tougher. And then, of course, he's been in the headlines in the last couple of weeks in response to those awful shootings of the lawmakers in Minnesota. But just before that happened, he had been in Washington testifying about sanctuary city policies and trying to pull the wool over our eyes on what his state's policies have been in that regard. But then he also did an interview at the Center for American Progress with Neera Tanden, always a favorite here at the Three Martini Lunch. And this also happened to be the morning after Israel launched its preemptive strikes for the first time on Iran. And so he was asked to respond to that, and he kind of meandered in a number of ways. And he thinks ultimately that the United States now, with Trump at the helm, has squandered the moral authority to be a leader in bringing this conflict to a respectable conclusion. And that's not the crazy part. Of course, he's going to criticize Trump. It's who he thinks is going to step in and be the moral leader in this situation that's crazy.
Now, who is the voice in the world that can negotiate some type of agreement in this? Who holds the moral authority? Who holds the ability to do that? Because we are not seen as a neutral actor. And we maybe never were. I don't want to tell anybody that. I think there's a lot of people who say you always leaned one way in this. But I think there was at least an attempt to be somewhat of the arbitrator in this. We saw President Carter do it with Begin and Sadat. We've had certain wins along the way that were actually mutually beneficial both ways. Now I ask who that is. And I mean, consistently over and over again, we're going to have to face the reality. It might be the Chinese.
So there you go, Jim. Tim Walz, who has taken countless trips to China, lied about being there during Tiananmen Square and so forth, and still a lot of unanswered questions that the media didn't care a whole lot to explore during his vice presidential run. But nonetheless, his idea that just off the top of his head, probably China is the one who should step in here and be the adult in the room. That should be really alarming to a lot of people.
First of all, Greg, anytime the interviewer at an event is Neera Tanden, I just wish Joe Manchin could show up and just pull an Alex Padilla. For those who don't remember, Joe Manchin infamously torpedoed Neera Tanden's nomination to be director of the Office of Management and Budget. I also believe that Susan Collins had opposed that after Tanden had said on Twitter that Susan Collins was a bonehead or something like that. Don't make fun of senators who may someday be voting on your confirmation hearings. But so, look, I suppose Walz, if asked about it now, would say, oh, what I meant is the other countries in the region would see China as having the moral authority to do the negotiation. That's not that much of a better answer, because most of the countries in the region either utterly hate Israel or they pose as hating Israel and are secretly not so upset about Israel, and certainly find Hamas to be a bunch of raving maniacs, and certainly find Iran to be a threat. But they're uncomfortable with saying that publicly because they're, in a lot of these cases, these countries, their press has usually state-run or certainly state-influenced press has been pumping out this constant propaganda of demonizing Israel for going back for generations. I've spent a little bit of time, way back in the day, in places like Egypt and Jordan, and I would get whatever English language news sources I could find there. And yes, I can tell you that, in addition to just telling you that Israel is bad, the Jews are bad, there are conspiracies out to get us. I remember them a movie review referring to Michael Clark Dunklin as a hefty Negro. So you just find language in that was an Egyptian newspaper. Like, okay, language you wouldn't find in the United States. So when that's been going around for that long, I would love to see more things occur with the Abraham Accords, which, by the way, in retrospect, makes the countries that did take steps forward, the Abraham Accords, look even more brave. It's very tough when you have told your populations, Israel's the root of all evil. All the problems in your life are because of Israel. The reason you're poor is because Israel controls the banks. The reason you're, everything goes back to Israel as a problem. It's very tough to turn around and say, hey, we're going to be friends with these guys now. So when they say, oh, we're not seen as a trusted third-party negotiator, well, I don't think we should be neutral between Israel and Iran. We also shouldn't be seen as neutral between Russia and Ukraine, right? We do take sides as a country. That's what alliances are all about, right? We were closer to the NATO countries than we were to the Warsaw Pact countries. That's the way things work. So Tim Walz's vision of one in which we are seen as some neutral arbiter, I don't know if it was ever realistic. And he alludes in those comments to saying maybe we were never seen as that way. Again, Greg, you and I are not as young as we used to be. And we came to Washington a long time ago, and almost always there is somebody who looks at the United States and says, we just try hard enough, we could get peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we've seen Bill Clinton try it. Bill Clinton bent over backwards, and by the end of his presidency, he was furious with Yasser Arafat for not taking the deal. Bush put a little bit of effort into it. I believe, was it Zinni he sent? Obama put a lot of effort, put a lot of pressure on Israel. It did not go anywhere. Trump let up the brakes and basically was making it very clear he didn't see any. He was going to try to use the Abraham Accords to develop commerce ties between certain Muslim and Arab countries and Israel to get these people to say, hey, maybe if we're making money with each other, we won't be so interested in killing each other. And then, Biden came back and it turned into, once again, if we just pressure Israel enough, at some point they'll make concessions and they'll all of a sudden these people chanting from the river to the sea and we're going to push the Jews into the ocean. All of a sudden those people will be reasonable and everyone will be fine. Guess what? It didn't work out that way. I don't think it's our job to figure out a way to negotiate peace between two people who have been at each other's throats. And the second thing is, you look at the Palestinian reaction to Hamas since Hamas basically got, the crap kicked out of it by Israel. There were plenty of Palestinians in Gaza who were like, good riddance to these guys. They have brought nothing but misery and impoverishment to us. They steal all the food aid. They spend all the money on tunnels and weapons systems. So you look at all that stuff. You look at the problems in the Middle East. Really, it's not the United States' fault. You have to give these other people of other countries some sense of agency, some sense of responsibility for the decisions they make and the consequences of those decisions. If you're Tim Walz and people have been saying you're a Manchurian candidate for the last, couple year or so, coming out and saying China's got the moral authority to fix the Middle East, that's not really dispelling it, right? That's basically playing into your. But maybe you go to the Center for American Progress or whatever that lefty group is. Maybe he just goes native. Greg, he's just being a knucklehead.
Yeah, Tim Walz having a very weak grasp on anything in the Middle East doesn't come as much of a shock, but his thoroughly unexplored ties over decades with the Chinese Communist Party, I think needs a lot more attention. He had written some stuff way back in the day when he was still a teacher that was very, very positive towards the regime, and it's just very, very disconcerting. And of course, China is buddy-buddy with Iran. Think about the fact that for a while there only Chinese ships were getting through into the Red Sea. So it's not like there were some sort of impartial arbiter in all of this as well. So Tim Walz, once again, not impressive on the big stage, which I guess shouldn't surprise us at all.
Greg, just one last point on that. So there was a time up until a little bit before COVID where the idea of China being our enemy, or at minimal a hostile state that it was really considered, crazy paranoid talk. And I remember Joe Biden in his first campaign appearances was like, the idea that these guys are going to take business from us, that's great. They're not bad folks. And in fact, I believe if you have an ongoing genocide of the Uyghurs, that yes, you are indeed bad folks. I think if you have a, terrible virus that comes out of your lab and ends up killing 25 million people all around the world, and you spend months lying about it, insisting to the world that it's not contagious and can't be spread for you, no, you're bad people, right? So that's the first. Biden eventually came around to it, but from, let's say, giving them most favored nation status in the mid-1990s to about 2019 or so, China is our partner in prosperity, and we're going to be buddies with these guys. And look at this picture with me in front of the Great Wall of China. Like, that was the mainstream position in American politics. And I think Tim Walz got really into that. And I don't think he is ever able to fully change over to the fact that these guys are, as Mitt Romney would put it, our preeminent geopolitical foe. Romney had said Russia. And that's when Obama said, the 80s called. They're looking for their foreign policy back. Look, China has emerged as a threat to the United States. And I don't think, to the extent Tim Walz, the knucklehead, can update his mental software, I don't think that mental software upgrade has been completed. And so he's spitting out stuff that is, he's spitting out data that's a decade old, so to speak.
That's the nicest way you can say it. So once again, the postulate remains true. Don't listen to anything Tim Walz says. So Jim, hope you have a great day. Reminder to everyone that our 4th of July special is tomorrow. Happy 4th. Happy weekend. See you later.
See you next time, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific 4th of July. Please listen to our special, and we'll see you again back next week on the 3 Martini Lunch.